Controversy around the Chicago Blackhawks continues. Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks is here to give us some perspective on it and talk about the team's prospects for the second half of the season.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. So glad you could join us, and thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. The controversy surrounding the Chicago Blackhawks organization continues, but Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks is finally here and ready to help us make some sense of all of this difficult mess. Jack, how you doing?
Tough times to be a Blackhawks fan, Gil, but I'm happy to be finally on the show again. It's good to be chatting with you, buddy. So glad we finally got in a segment here on this Sunday afternoon.
Likewise, good to have you back. And look, Rocky Wirtz with some, to put it nicely, controversial reactions to a question from a member of the media this week. Why don't you fill our listeners in and give us a little bit of perspective as to what this means to the organization and to the fans?
Yeah, I mean, for those who didn't see it, it was just an absolute angry tirade, basically, that Rocky Wirtz went on towards Blackhawks beat writers Mark Lazarus first, and then also Phil Thompson later on. But basically, he was asked a valid question, I thought, and I had a lot of people who aren't even Blackhawks fans necessarily, just a lot of people from or different places messaging me saying that wasn't even like a question where he was trying to pry answers out of Rocky Wirtz and the organization or anything. It was a valid question asking how the organization plans to empower players in the future to ensure a situation like this doesn't happen again, where a player is worried that his status with the team is more important than his well-being, because that's completely backwards. So for Rocky to handle that situation the way he did, it was just, I can't even put into words on how embarrassing it was, Gil. And for this to be his first real statement since the Kyle Beach lawsuit came to a conclusion not that long ago, I mean, it couldn't have been handled any worse, right? And for this Blackhawks town hall to be live on YouTube, people are watching, there's cameras everywhere. And for Rocky Wirtz to have that kind of performance, I mean, it's unfathomable, and it was just, it made me sick to my stomach, really. And not the first or second or third time that the Blackhawks have done that to me and a lot of their fans in the past few months. So another frustrating situation. And on the show, on Locked On Blackhawks on Wednesday, the day before, or the morning before the town hall meeting happened, the first thing I talked about, what I wanted to see out of this meeting, Gil, was I wanted to see an open and honest mindset into the organization and how it's going to be different. Because I thought that was the only way you're going to buy the fans back into this absolute dumpster fire right now. Give them an honest look through the window at what's going on with this franchise. Admit you were wrong and tell us how you're going to fix this both on the ice and off the ice going forward. That's what I was hoping to see. I did not get anything close to that. So an absolute disaster on many different levels. And it's just hard to be confident that the Blackhawks are actually going to implement real changes and real progress here when that's the guy at the top of the ladder calling the shots. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know, the thing is, what you spelled out, what you were hoping to see would have been the best possible scenario. But in between that best possible scenario and what we got, there was still the diplomatic, well, we're working on this. We have a plan in place. I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics, but we do have a plan. It involves, some vague generalizations that he could put forth and go on from there. And instead, of course, we got the angry tirade.
Right. I know it couldn't have gone any worse. And it's a shame, really, because the last couple of months, I do believe the people that were up there with Rocky, Danny Wirtz, his son, who's the president of the Blackhawks, and Jamie Faulkner, who is an outside mind that they kind of brought in to take care of some business affairs. I've thought they've said all the right things, and I've heard even Daniel Carcillo, a former Blackhawk, take what you will of your thoughts on Daniel Carcillo. I know there's basically two sides of the coin there to Carcillo, but one thing I saw that he said on Twitter was that every situation he's had and encountered with Danny Wirtz, he thought he was a good man, a good dude. And he said if there was anyone to fix this mess right now that's around in Chicago at the moment, it would be Danny. So take that for what you will from Daniel Carcillo. But I do agree. I thought Danny Wirtz has said all the right things, but this was just, I mean, for the I know it hasn't been great progress. Obviously, they've fallen so many steps back because of everything that's been released and what we found out about this franchise. But for the small progress they were making, it was just another huge setback for this franchise as a whole and how people view them as an organization. So, yeah, just very disappointing on basically every level you can name, Gil.
So where do you go from here? How does this team re-engage the fans in a positive way after all of this negativity?
Yeah. Oof, that's $1 million question. I know there's a lot of people who I've seen on social media who are, you know, whether or not it's honest or not, but they're even having the thoughts of contemplating rooting for another team because that's how bad it is with the Blackhawks. So I don't know. It's tough because on the ice, it's not very fun to watch this team either right now. So I really hope that they make a good hire here in this general manager search that they're going through right now. Kyle Davidson, who's their current interim, for what I've been told by a couple of sources, Blackhawks insider Charlie Roumeliotis, guy who works for NBC Sports Chicago, awesome fan of the show and awesome dude. He's told me that he kind of feels like it's Davidson's job to lose. And one thing I've liked about Kyle Davidson, he was thrown right into the fire when Stan Bowman was resigned. And he had a press conference where he introduced Derek King as the new head coach. And for being a young guy that not really many people knew anything about before being named the interim general manager, I was like, wow, this kid really handled this well. And from what I've heard too, Davidson's someone who kind of likes outside the box thinking and isn't afraid to go around the organization and ask people for questions, ask for their opinions. And I think that's the type of hire the Blackhawks need to turn this thing around, not someone who's they just need a different mindset because clearly this one isn't working. They also had an interview with Eric Tulsky, who's an assistant general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes, who's known for being a really good analytical guy and has worked his way up through the pipelines there in Carolina. So he sounds like another intriguing hire to me. But I think, you know, they got to have a good place and plan from a new face, a different mindset to come into this organization, kind of shake things up, because what we've seen for the last 5 or 6 years now clearly hasn't working. The Blackhawks haven't won a playoff series since winning the Stanley Cup back in 2015. So something's got to change. And I really do believe it's going to have to become at the general manager position and possibly at the ownership level too, while we're at it, Gil.
Looks like, you know, the Blackhawks will not make the playoffs this year. What do you expect with an interim general manager to happen at the trade deadline, if anything?
Yeah, so the Blackhawks do plan on making their decision for their long-term general manager, maybe within even the next week here. They do want the new guy to come in and kind of not feel rushed into having to make moves because it's right before the trade deadline or anything. They want to get him settled, get a grasp of this team and be able to implement his ideas going forward, because a big part of that for the Blackhawks is going to be the trade deadline, where they're probably going to be trying to get rid of some of their expiring contracts in the summer, guys like Marc-Andre Fleury, who's going to be one of the hottest names out there on the market. Even a veteran defenseman like Calvin DeHaan, former Islander, could be extremely valuable to a team that's trying to make a playoff push as well. And there's a couple of other guys along the way. So the Blackhawks are trying to get their new general manager in here as fast as possible. They're not trying to rush the decision, but they do understand the timing of this and the magnitude that these next couple months could have for the organization.
All right, Jack, why don't you tell our listeners where they could find you on social media and where they could find the podcast?
Absolutely. You can find Locked On Blackhawks wherever you get your podcast, whether that be through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. You can find it anywhere. It's absolutely for free. If you want to check out my account on Twitter, first the podcast, you can find at @L O _Blackhawks. As for my personal account, you can check me out at Jack Bushman too, where I'll be tweeting about Blackhawk stuff, golf, basically anything sports. You can find me there if you want to follow.
All right, Jack, always a pleasure to have you here, and hopefully next time it'll be about something a little more positive.
Yeah, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, buddy. Hopefully we'll get some good news coming soon that we can discuss on the pod. But yeah, thank you for having me again, Gil. Glad we got to get one in here today.
All right, thank you.